fantasy football fans, I'm the Raging Redhead Cam Stewart from HotRoster today, and this is your quarterback report. Week 6 was one for some of the more obscure quarterbacks, as Cody Kessler found himself with a top 10 performance with 336 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. And Case Keenum, yeah, that guy you forgot about in Los Angeles, he went off in Detroit for 321 yards and 3 TDs through the air, plus he added a score on the ground, only a second of his career. All of that production allowed Keenum to nearly hit 30 fantasy points. Unbelievable stuff, right? Well, with Keenum's performance, there's a lot more underneath the surface that might explain it. And in this case, what lies beneath the surface is the Lions' defense. It's brutal and is clearly matchup proof. Detroit's secondary has allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks through 6 weeks, and I wouldn't expect anything different come Sunday when they face the Washington Redskins. Kirk Cousins hasn't been consistent as he was last season. When comparing his numbers from last year at this time, they were oddly similar. And it just so happened that Week 7 was what turned it around for him, as he can offer 300-plus yards and 3 touchdowns against the lowly Buccaneers. 1 year later, he now faces a weak pass defense in Detroit, so don't be surprised if he has a huge day against the Lions. Just keep your eyes on Jordan Reed's status. Cousins has a 16-14 touchdown to interception ratio without the big tight end. He's going to need him back in the lineup to increase his ceiling. But given the right matchup on HotRoster, I got to roll with Cousins. One guy who doesn't seem to be dependent on his tight ends is the man from Tennessee, Marcus Mariota. Over the last 2 weeks, no quarterback has scored more fantasy points than the Oregon product. He's been electric, racking up 120 yards on the ground to go along with 6 touchdowns through the air. And right, I almost forgot, he even added an all-important rushing touchdown during that stretch. And guess what, fantasy friends? It should be only getting better this week when Mariota faces off against his division rivals, the Indianapolis Colts. They give up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Part of the reason for that is because the Colts allow 300 yards passing on average, so I'd expect Mariota to continue this wave of success. His counterpart from Jacksonville, Blake Bortles, he even managed 36 yards rushing and a TD against the Colts. Expect Mariota to exploit that if he can and have another huge week. Speaking of Blake Bortles, if there was ever a time for the struggling quarterback to put it together, you gotta believe it's this week. The Jags have a date at home with the Oakland Raiders, a team that has allowed 12 touchdowns to only 5 interceptions. And why is that important? Well, Bortles hasn't had one game this season where he's thrown more touchdowns than picks. And this coming from a guy who notched 35 TDs last year. Hence why, if there's ever a time, it's now or never against the Raiders. But let me send a warning out there to those who are thinking this is a sure thing. Most of that production came against the Raiders' pass defense and has come from studs like Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, and Phillip Rivers. Don't be fooled, Blake Bortles isn't any of those guys and could very well put up a dud like Alex Smith did against the Raiders this weekend. Speaking of a dud who's turned into a stud, what about Eli Manning? Wow, he was one of only 2 quarterbacks to toss the rock for 400 yards this weekend, along with Drew Brees, and he finally topped over 20 fantasy points this season. So, although he might not like the antics of Odell Beckham Jr., he can thank him for the monster day. In the first half, Manning had only 104 yards before he caught fire in the second half with his buddy OBJ. Now there's reason to believe he can have another huge Sunday. The New York Football Giants are headed across the pond to London, England for a date with the Los Angeles Rams, whose defense is banged up. Last week, LA saw the return of William Hayes and Michael Brockers to their defensive line and expected that Robert Quinn should be back this week, which would help a defense that only has 10 sacks to their name. But it'll likely take another week before the Rams are firing on all cylinders. Already banged up and having to fly across the ocean won't be easy on the players. Plus, the Giants do a good enough job already protecting Eli Manning, so I expect him and OBJ to have another big day, in spite of the matchup taking place in England. One situation I'm definitely avoiding this week is Carson Palmer. The former Heisman Trophy winner made his return on Monday night against the Jets. The matchup was there, the points were up for grabs, and he didn't get them. One reason might have been because of David Johnson's monster night. But that doesn't matter because this week Palmer is locked in a duel with the Seattle Seahawks, and I expect him to struggle. It's worth noting that he left the fourth quarter late with a strained hammy on Monday night, and while he's expected to be healthy and ready for Seattle, no doubt the Hawks will attack him and blitz him, causing him tons of grief. A couple other guys I'm looking to try and exploit against on HotRoster cards are Alex Smith, Aaron Rodgers, and Ryan Fitzpatrick. First, Alex Smith looks like the belle of the ball again this week, and he's set to face the Saints at Arrowhead Stadium. The problem is the Chiefs continue to place an emphasis on the running game, and Smith just isn't that type of quarterback. He had less fantasy points than an injured Ben Roethlisberger in Week 6. Think about that one. Aaron Rodgers doesn't seem like Aaron Rodgers anymore. The two-time MVP has been trending in the wrong direction for much longer than you think. Sunday's performance marked the 14th consecutive game he's failed to hit 300 yards. That's Alex Smith territory. And although I don't expect that to last, a Thursday night date with the Bears at Lambeau will likely not do the trick. For starters, the Bears' D has played well against the pass, and two, no way the quick turnaround bodes well for Rodgers. I'm going to pass on AR this week. Lastly, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Do I really need to say more? Oh my God, this guy has been brutal the last few weeks, tossing 10 interceptions in his last 4 games, including one on Monday night. Jets coach Todd Bowles has declared Fitzy will remain the quarterback against the Ravens next week, a team that just got lit up by the other New York team, the Giants. But Fitzy isn't even in the same discussion as Eli Manning right now. He's actually in a conversation of his own. Given how bad he's been, I wouldn't be shocked to see if Geno Smith took over somewhere down the line. That's how scary the situation is in New York with those New York football Jets, Jets. Anyway, that's it for me. Tomorrow I'm going to be back with my running backs preview and what matchups we should look to exploit. And for those of you who don't know what HotRoster is, well, I feel bad for you. Come on, you got to go check it out. Download it. It's one of the best sports apps out there. And then for help winning the game, check out HotRoster today every weekday at 4:30 Eastern, only on the Fantasy Sports Network. For HotRoster now, I'm Cam Stewart. I'm going to see you on the virtual gridiron.